Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well. We're going to get Eric on the call here, and we're going to get started. All right, guys. I just invited Eric, so Eric's going to take a second to join on here, and then we're going to get started on talking about working with high school athletes. Coach Murillo, how are you? I miss you, my friend. I miss you. Sean, what's up, bud? If you guys have any questions on working with high school athletes, do me a favor, throw them in the comment section, and we will do our best to get you guys the best information possible. Don't mind the scratches. Tough week at jiu-jitsu. Murillo, so good to hear from you, my friend. I'll never forget when you helped me in that. There he is.
All right. I'm sitting here waiting for your invitation. It's been sitting there. I couldn't access it.
So anyways, guys, you're doing well. Well, I'm in Boston. Eric's in Jersey. It's pretty crappy here. Big ice storm. It's pretty gross out there. I'm not sure. What's it doing down in your neck of the woods in Jersey?
Hasn't quite turned to ice just yet, but it's on its way.
Yeah, nah, not too fun. But anyways, so we're going to get started. Working with high school athletes, that's something that Eric and I have done for quite some time. I've actually been in high school weight rooms. I've worked with several teams, several club teams. We actually work with teams inside the gym as well. And today we want to really go over and highlight sort of the key components when it comes to working with high school athletes, because there are several considerations that you have to actually consider when it comes to designing a training program, when you're thinking about safety, when you're thinking about giving them the best bang for their buck. So I'm going to actually have Eric sort of start off, and Eric is a boatload of information when it comes to working with high school athletes. Eric, what would you say are your top two priorities when it comes to working with high school athletes?
Well, that really depends on what they're looking for with them. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you one example. I have contracts with multiple schools as part of what I do now. I've been doing it for the last 20 years, and each team is somewhat of a unique situation. The schools, they have access to me for what they need for their off-season and in-season programs. And the biggest thing that I ask them is what is it that you're looking for? And when I say that, I say, what is it that you think is the thing that is holding you back? What makes you lose games or matches? And what's the thing that you think you need to win games? And that's a critical question that most people don't ask. They just assume we're going to go in a weight room and we're just going to just put together this blanket program for football or for whatever sport we have. And each one has a unique need. And some coaches, their biggest concern is we're just not fast enough, based especially on what we have to work with from we're a public school. We can't go out and recruit. And so because that, we have a team that we need to build some speed with. Or we have one of the biggest things is, the most famous 4 words in sports: way will be pretty good if we stay healthy. But our biggest concern is that we've had a ton of injuries in the past and we can't lose our key players. What could we do to make our players more robust and more resilient so we can try to stay out of the training room? So each situation is a little bit unique. There are situations where I've been in where I'm the team strength coach and I'm there for all their lifts. I've done that over the course of the years. I also have situations like I just mentioned now where I'm more of a consultant and I'm coming in and I'm putting together a program, but I'm not there to execute every single one of their workouts. I'm putting together a program that I'll lead them in, and then they will then follow that program under the guidance of one of their coaches. Which brings up another point with one of the big things with high schools is that there's a big difference between having a strength coach and then having one of your skill coaches run a strength and conditioning program. Sometimes you can get blessed where you have somebody who can do both, but really that's more of an oddity than it is the norm. And unfortunately, what you end up getting a guy who played a sport, has a physical education background maybe, and now is coaching, but hasn't really studied the science of strength and conditioning. And now they're trying to run a lifting or a speed program with their team. And a lot of times it falls short. And the analogy that I use is that, I played high school football. It doesn't mean that I should show up on your sidelines on Friday night, put a headset on, and start calling your offense. I mean, I might be able to get by, but I'll not do really well. Just like a skill coach might be able to get by with their strength and conditioning program, but probably won't do real well if they don't have the background and what it takes to organize one of these. Because there is a lot of thought, and we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah. So you're saying you should probably stay in your lane, huh?
Well, the first you got to know your lane, and with that, there's, obviously when you're dealing with athletics, there's a lot of ego that goes into that, and we have to make sure that we manage that and understand everybody's role. And there's also multiple roles in this thing. It's not just we have to make sure the coaching staff is on board. We have to make sure we create a culture. We'll talk about that later. And then we have people like the athletic trainers. They're a huge asset to us if we can leverage them, and if we can help them out by trying to keep people out of the athletic training room. We can really be somebody that they're going to lean on, because I've never met an athletic trainer that says, I wish we could get more people in the training room. They are just in a triage trying to manage and get kids in and out. And the more we can keep people out of there, the more they're going to love us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that, because I had a couple sprained ankles in high school and in college, and I remember the ATCs, man. Those individuals are overworked and underpaid. Like, you got a line of, they're taking ankles and they're really trying to keep the wheels on. You're right. It's almost like it is definitely a triage scenario, because they're just doing whatever they can to try to keep the athletes, back on the field, court, whatever. But the hard part is it's a very, when it comes to their scenario, it's a very reactive approach, right? They're just doing everything that they can. And if the high school is fortunate enough to have a strength and conditioning coach, or even maybe not someone that's hired by the school, maybe someone like yourself who has contracts, I mean, you're the guy that can design a quality program that will hopefully make a nice dent in the injury prevention side of athletics. Now, we understand you can't just write a program and prevent injuries, but listen, if clients and athletes move a little bit better and they have an intelligent strength and conditioning program, I think we're absolutely going to mitigate risk a little bit. But there are scenarios like in contact sports and football, someone, hits you in the side of the knee and you go down. You can't train your way away from that scenario. So it should really be a team effort. And I think the communication between the sport and the skills coaches, the athletic trainers, and the athletes is vital, because when done correctly, those sort of multiple parties can really make a significant improvement in the overall outcomes for their athletes. And really, that's what you want, right? You want your athletes to obviously enjoy their training. You want them to get bigger, stronger, faster, but really it's about keeping them healthy, because everyone thinks strength and conditioning is just about performance, and absolutely it is, but it's also about keeping your athletes on the field.
Now, here's when you said top two, probably the one that's the biggest hill to climb when you're dealing with high schools, and really teams in general, but this is way too prevalent in high schools, is this whole mental toughness thing that we think that a lot of coaches think we need to do. And, we got to get these kids tougher. And we're going to do that by way of burpee or gassers or running poles or whatever it is. And we're going to try to make these kids tougher. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't equate. One doesn't equate the other. I work a lot with baseball, and I joke with guys who are professional guys that I train, and I said, never in a pressure situation, you're on the mound, you're at the plate, did you say, man, I'm so glad I ran all those poles, or I would never be able to handle this situation, right? That's not what's going to get us mentally tougher. And then it's gone so far, and I've had this discussion with John Tureen, who's a great friend, who's a former strength coach of the Colts, and we know him through the FMS world as well. And I said, unfortunately, what high school strength and conditioning has become, and we've seen it, firsthand. I have two boys that are now out of high school. John has a son in high school now going through it. We were having this discussion, and we said it has now become legal child abuse. And what I mean is, if your son or daughter came home from school and said, "Oh, my legs are shot. I can't even walk up the stairs. My back's all jacked up." And you ask them, "Well, why? What happened?" And they said, "Well, something we did in English class got me this way." You would immediately have the superintendent, the principal, everybody involved, and that teacher be fired, right? But if you come home and say, "Well, my coach did this," then it's, "Yeah, good. That coach is tough. I love it. They're hard nosed. I love that stuff. That's going to make us tougher and stronger." No, it's not. It's going to get kids hurt. And I have a post that, we've been doing posts as a theme each week. And this theme, obviously, we're working with high school teams, is I have a post coming out that high school athletes are not Navy SEALs, right? I've been blessed to go out and be on 2 different SEAL bases and do some education there. Those are completely different animals. And what they do for training isn't necessarily what makes them SEALs. What they do for training is how they get rid of people out of the SEALs program and weed them out. But what you're talking about, the most elite of the elite forces in our military, can't be compared to some wet noodle 14-year-old freshman kid who's never been in a weight room, and now all of a sudden you're going to make them try to be special forces. It's insane. And so the mental toughness thing's got to go away, and we got to break that mentality. So question that I get all the time is, what about testing? People know us, a lot of people know us through FMS, and that's obviously a part of what we do. But like, what type of testing do you do if you're working with a team?
So it obviously when we can, we love to run them through the screen. But what we try to do is really just to get some baseline information that will sort of dictate where we're at. For example, if we want to do some very, very simple baseline testing, we'll use like check their power production, lower body. We'll do like a vertical leap or something along the line of that. Or we could do a broad jump, whatever we feel is a little bit more appropriate for the individuals. And then we can look at, sort of like an upper body medicine ball throw. And again, it really depends on where they're at in the season, right? So here's an example. If it's an off season for a football player, doing a 300-yard shuttle test is a waste of time because it's the complete off season. So I think before we even talk about testing, we need to talk about what part of the season are they in. And I've seen it all the time. Someone else told me the other day, we have the kids do a Cooper test to see how far they can run in 12 minutes. It's just like, well, yes, we understand the reason for that, right? We want to see if we get a baseline of fitness, but some kids just can't run very well, or maybe they're really good at running. And if they're really good at running, it doesn't mean that they're going to be good at soccer or lacrosse. Maybe they should be doing track and field. So the testing has to be safe and appropriate for the time. But I would say from a performance testing standpoint, we're looking at lower body, upper body power. Maybe we can look at acceleration. But again, we have to see if those athletes are even ready to participate in those types of sort of assessments and testings and evaluation. But at the same time, when are we doing that? Because if you get a deconditioned athlete that hasn't done a damn thing in months, and you say, all right, we're checking our 40, you're just waiting for a hamstring to go, right? You're just waiting for a hip flexor to go. So it does depend on where you're at, but it also just gives us metrics to go by. But we never do strength testing. I'm not looking at their max or anything. We're not looking at their 1RM, 3RM, none of that, because it really doesn't matter, especially in an untrained athlete.
Well, the max strength testing, I've kind of gone both ways with it. Some coaches, that's kind of their baba, and they're not going to give that up. And so there's certain ways you can sometimes you can do it. And if you've developed the ramp up time to do that, I'm never doing that day one. Football team shows up first day of January and we're maxing out, even though some schools do that. I actually had a college kid, Division I college kid, tell me he was all excited. He's texting me, he goes, "Coach, I crushed it on my maxes." He said, the only one was, I think his deadlift or his squat. He goes, "I could have done better, but I was tired from the deadlift." I said, "You did them both on the same day?" He goes, "Well, we did them all on the same day." So they did clean, bench, deadlift, and squat all on the same day and found out their maxes. What do you think their nervous system was like by the time they got to their 4th max effort lift as a 19-year-old, right? So that's where it can go wrong. where max testing can have some value, and here's where I've used it, and we can even do that off of a 2 or 3 rep max and extrapolate it if we don't feel safe with the kids doing 1 RMs, is where I do use it is one of the biggest things that I see as a flaw in a lot of weight rooms is that there's no tracking, planning, or specifics as to what they're using in terms of load. And so what I mean by that is walk in a weight room and walk up to any kid and say, how much are you going to use for this lift? I use one of the big plates and one of the little plates. Okay, well, how much did you use last week? I think I did that. Well, okay, well, what are you trying to get to? I want to do 250. Okay, well, that's 2 of those big plates plus more. So like they don't even like they're so far removed from that and so they don't even know if they're getting stronger because they have some just arbitrary weight that they pick each time. So what I love is I love Jim Wendler's 5-3-1 system for some of our bigger lifts, you know, our deadlift, our main push press, but our deadlift and our squat and our bench. And then what we can do is once I have their estimated max, I can plug that in and I have a spreadsheet that I put the whole team in and it just gives them everything. And instead of calling it 5+ and 3+ and 1+, I just call it level 1, 2, and 3. And then we rotate which one we're doing each week. And then that way they know, hey, I'm Mike. I go up to the spreadsheet. I look and see this is my exact warm-up weight. This is my exact weight work weight for set 1, 2, and 3. And I know how many reps I have to get. And that way there is no guessing. And everything is plotted out for them. Because if not, high school kids get on their own are just going to max out every single time. And they don't understand why that's not a good thing. Going back to what you said before, testing gone wrong. I got a text from a dad from a Division I prospect who's in high school now. He came to me at the end of his football season last year, had a hamstring issue. We were able to help him out, get him back on the field before the end of the season. He texted me 2 weeks ago and said, hey, is it okay if he runs his 40? And my answer back, and I have enough relationship rapport with him, I said, my answer is, why do we care what a defensive lineman runs his 40 in January? And he said, good point. He won't run it. So you have to kind of like take it in context, like what are you going to do with that information? So with testing, if you're not going to do anything with the information, don't bother. So as much as I love FMS testing, if I don't have the ability to implement strategies to do something with that information, I'm not going to do it. And so your biggest obstacle is time, right? We have to deal with kids who are multi-sport athletes, right? So even if I have a kid right now in the off season, but he's going to go play a spring sport, I really only have him for 8 weeks. And then he may, depending if his coach does any lifting in season, he may become completely deconditioned. So all the testing I did now may not matter. And so we have to kind of manage a lot of different things, and space, time, access, all these things are issues. And, you know, I joke all the time with my kids and, you know, and the teams, and they say, well, why don't we do this? And why don't we do this? And say, I'd love to do all that stuff. But the expression I use is, kids, we ain't Alabama, right? We're a public school. We don't have an unlimited budget. We don't have a 30,000 foot weight room with a full indoor field house next to it. And yeah, listen, I'd love to be able to have push units at 10 different squat racks. And I'd love to be able to have a staff of 5 working underneath me that I can do FMS testing and I can do sprint testing and all that stuff. That's not reality at most schools, right? Maybe in some of the big schools, maybe in some of the private schools, most schools that in high schools that we're working with, we don't have those options. And so you're somewhat limited. And so I know one of the things that you're really good, Mike, whether it's in your own facility, which you've done an awesome job with, or in a high school, is space utilization. Like I put up a post today about choosing equipment when you're putting together a weight room. What are some of the things you could suggest to the people that are putting together a weight room for their high school team?
So, you know, obviously there's several obstacles when it comes to that. So I remember when I was in high school, it was bigger, stronger, faster. And the coaches would just hand everybody the booklets that got, you know, ripped out of an old workbook and photocopied 15 different times. And again, we didn't really know much about it, but we just did what we were told. Then I remember when I was in college, it was a weight room with a bunch of machines, some old beat up bikes, and that's about it. But so in my sort of opinion, when it comes to a high school weight room, I would love to see, obviously, multifunctional squat racks where you can do your squatting, your benching, your pull-ups hang a suspension trainer on that, and you've got a decent amount of things that you can do just with a rack and a suspension trainer and a barbell and some plates. I would say that's going to be absolutely vital. And then, having some dumbbells and some kettlebells is definitely an advantageous thing to have. And honestly, you don't need much more than that. If they have space to do sleds, that would be fantastic. But it's really about the space and how you organize the training program. It's not so much about seeing how many things you could sort of jam into, a space. Because I've seen some of these gyms where there's literally no open space. It's machine, machine, rack, machine, machine, rack. And there's not even a flow that goes into it. And if you are working with a high school, you want to set it up so you can have multiple athletes working at the same time, but in a fashion that allows things to flow a little bit seamlessly. And I would say the other thing, honestly, is just having the whiteboard with a good warm up on it, and the lifts for the day. But again, it's the basics, and trying to get really, really good at the basics. A few other things I would love to see, if possible, are just some different height plyo boxes, which could be used for plyos. But let's say you're squatting and you want to squat to a certain depth because maybe the athletes don't understand what below parallel is on a squat. Then you could give them something sort of to aim their hips to. One thing that I've noticed, especially when I'm teaching athletes to squat, and this can be with a goblet squat, double kettlebell front squat, almost every high school athlete that I work with is going to squat better with a heel wedge, and is going to squat better with a target, something that they can tap themselves to. And here's the scoop. If I can get them to squat, even if it's not perfectly below parallel, but if I can make it look good by giving them a little bit of a heel wedge and giving them a target, then I'm happy with that, because I have to remind myself and remind them, guys, this is not a powerlifting meet. We're not trying to get white lights. We're not trying to go below parallel. We're trying to get you stronger for your sport. And when strength coaches start focusing way too much on PRs and the big lifts, and they forget about, hey, this person's a soccer player or a lacrosse player, that's where I think things get lost. Oh, did we lose Eric?
Yeah.
Oh, we got you.
No, you were breaking up a little bit there. So one is, the first thing I tell every team is that we are in here not to train to get better at training. We're training to win games. And so we're not doing bench press to get better at bench press. We're doing bench press because it's going to lead to something that we're going to be able to translate it onto the field. And so I was, in a lot of things I've evolved on. I used to be the guy with the record board, the top 5 and who's in each thing. And it was great motivation. But the problem is that the more I did it, the more I realized that the kids who are in the top 5 on that record board weren't the top 5 when we hit the field. And so you'd have kids that were, that kid was the strongest kid carrying a water cooler in the whole program, but what didn't translate to being the most dynamic athlete on the field. So that's where strength gets lost. Where other things, I've evolved on, it's also like taking a step back and understanding the mentality of what you're working with. You're working with, developed minds that are in high school and where their head's at. The post that I have coming up later today is a new concept that I just introduced. And so we always have this struggle that, especially with the male athletes, is that there's going to be vanity there. They're in a gym, they want to work out, they want to bench press, they want to do curls, they want to look great in the mirror. And so I used to be the guy on the soapbox saying, look, we don't, bicep curls don't win championships, and we're here to do, to get better and so forth. And then realizing that every time I said that, they'd nod and they kind of look at, corner their eye at each other, because they knew they were meeting each other at LA Fitness in 2 hours and they were going to go bench and do curls. And so instead of trying to fight that, say, why don't we actually give it to them? And so, Coach Mike Boyle has a great expression that we use quite a bit in our course, is that they're going to do arms and abs anyway. So might as well at least have them do it right. So I came up with something that I do with my teams. It's called Treat of the Week. And say, listen, when you want to grow up and be an adult, and you have to eat your meats and your veggies and all your main things, but when you're done, maybe then you can have a treat. You can have your ice cream, your sweets. So I came up with Treat of the Week, and we have a little circuit of, biceps and triceps and shoulders, and it's 2 or 3 of 10 to 20 reps. It's enough that at the end of your workout, if you finish your whole workout, you can do that. They get excited, they roll up their sleeves, they look in the mirror, and they're bought in. And if that stops them from doing even more ridiculous stuff at LA Fitness, I'm happy, right? And so that's where you can get more buy-in. And they're like, hey, Coach Zagatti's kind of cool. He lets us do the arm stuff at the end. And it's, we'll look good coming off the bus, if nothing else. So that kind of stuff buys in. The one thing we do have to be cautious about is conditioning. And we're strength and conditioning coaches. Like you said, we spend so much time talking about strength, we don't talk about conditioning. And conditioning is done awfully wrong when it comes to high schools. And whether it's baseball coaches running polls, I had a baseball coach. I was at a school, and I'm addressing one team, and I overhear there's a meeting, an interest meeting for baseball, and I hear one of the assistant coaches go, well, you better be in shape. You better show up ready to run 3 miles. 3 miles. I got out my calculator. That's 176 times around the bases without stopping. That's insane. Like, what that makes, not only is that not match up physiologically, but from a strategic standpoint. I've watched a lot of games. Both my boys play baseball. Watched a lot of games. I've never, at the end of any of the thousands of games I've watched, walked away from the field saying, man, if we were just had better conditioning, we would have won that game. Never in a baseball game has that happened. So why are we wasting a big chunk of not only wasting a big chunk of our practice time for that, but we actually may be making them worse. And so how we understand conditioning is really wrong. One more story, and then I want to get your thoughts, is that I had a kid at one of the schools that I work with. He just signed his letter of intent to go to a Division I school to be a lineman. This kid's huge, 6'5", 300. I think he was, at one point, he was up to like 330, maybe almost 340. And it wasn't necessarily a good 330, 340. And so he goes to a prospect camp when he was getting recruited. And he texts me afterwards. He says, Coach, I just talked to the coach at this school, and he says I need to lose weight, and he says I need to start running. Okay, now if you ever saw this kid, he's your typical oversized lineman where like his medial malleolus like rubs the inside of the ground when he walks. His knees kind of rub together, and he is a mess. Can you imagine what it would look like if he went in distance run? So even if it works, which we know it just all comes down to his diet, and that's ultimately, I had a Zoom call with his mom about talking about his diet. But even if the running was going to get the weight off, great, he'll be 20 pounds lighter and he'll have no knees left by the time he gets down to you. So we have to understand, like, it has to match, and it also has to like make sense. And what's the cost of that, right? And there's a big debate. And then if anybody's been following with Coach Boyle, actually talking about orthopedic costs, and we have to look at that and say, what is the pounding we're going to put into people with conditioning, and is it worth it? So what are your thoughts on some of the conditioning mistakes you've seen?
Well, so I think a few things. One, I think far too many people cram 3 to 4 weeks before the season begins. We get it all the time. Hey, my son or daughter is trying out for the soccer team or the football team in 4 weeks. Can you help us? And it's just like, we should have had this conversation in June, right, or May. So I think one of the big mistakes people make is they cram, and they think, well, I can just make up lost time by going out and doing sprints every day or running long distance. And then that's the exact thing that's happened. And then all of a sudden, the orthopedic costs, right? Things start to bother them. They start to get knee pain, hip pain, low back pain. And then they can't even play because they're spending all of their time icing and heating and trying to manage those injuries that they basically did to themselves because they did not prepare themselves accordingly. So I would argue that the big thing for a lot of people is just not cramming and trying to build that base ahead of time. And then also when it comes to really focusing on GPP, that general physical preparedness stuff, we have to realize that there are ways to get people in shape and ways that we can do that that's not going to kill them from an orthopedic standpoint. So always paying attention to what is the energy expenditure of that specific sport requires. So if I'm training a soccer player, well, the soccer player needs a lot different qualities than the baseball player, right? But again, you just have to know what it's going to sort of look like, and what does their energy expenditure look like, because I feel like that's a part that people often miss. I also think that people, when it comes to designing a strength and conditioning program, they don't understand incremental progress, right? Because, for example, if you're bench pressing, you know, you could go, and if you can bench press 100 pounds, well, you're not going to bench press 200 the next day, because you probably can't. But the problem is that when it comes to conditioning, you can double the work very, very easily. You could run a mile, and what do they do the next day? They run 2 miles. Well, maybe they just should have ran a mile and a tenth or a mile and a quarter. So it's understanding that incremental progress and not just jumping off the couch and trying to double their work. I see it all the time. And this is where a lot of people just get injured, because they truly don't understand how to incrementally load things or give people enough variety. So when I'm designing programs, especially again, I've worked with a lot of soccer players. We have some days that are sprint repeats where we're doing 10-yard repeats, 20-yard repeats, and so on and so forth. Other days we're doing tempo runs where we're going to have them do, a 100-meter run, but we're working at 80%. We're trying to work on their stride length and their cadence and their tempo. And that's another way we do it. And then if we really want to try to find ways to sort of build the aerobic base or do that sort of long-term, that road work, which I really hate, because most of the people that go out and run long distance end up getting injured. But there's ways to do that. There's ways to develop the entire system when things are programmed accordingly. So you have to look at the physiological demands of the sport, and then you have to design your program accordingly. But the problem is most people don't really understand that. It's just gassers, right? It's wind sprints, and that's it. So I really just think the biggest issue from a conditioning standpoint is the way that they program, because they don't have a logical approach. At least a lot of the times I've seen in some weight rooms with strength training, you see some 5x5s, right? And then you see maybe some 3x3s, and then maybe some singles or something like that, which is not a bad thing. But when it comes to conditioning, it's like run 2 miles, run 3 miles, do a Cooper test, do an intermittent yo-yo test. And again, those things aren't necessarily bad, but is the athlete prepared for that? And is it going to make a huge benefit if they improve? Like you were saying earlier, the record boards, I've seen it all the time. I've seen really, really gifted athletes in the weight room absolutely suck at their sport. But what happens is people tend to gravitate what they're good at. So you get a kid that's good at benching, he's going to want to bench, right? That same kid that's good at benching may hate squatting. He's not going to squat. So I think what we have to do is educate people that, listen, yes, we know that you like to do these things that you're good at, but if you're already good at them, there's no need to do any more. I mean, I always think of the story that, Gray told us about working with the athlete down at the University of Miami. They had the fastest kid in basically collegiate football, and they put him on an overspeed treadmill to try to make him faster. He was already the fastest kid. Why would you put him on an overspeed treadmill? So those are the things I think we have to consider is, is your goal, whether it's a strength and conditioning standpoint, to have the best numbers, or are you trying to win games? And that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, and so with the other thing with that, going is going to do my son, he had a coach and they had to do the 1 mile run as their preseason conditioning test for baseball. Again, it's 50 times around the bases. I don't know why you need to do that. But my question is this: if let's say he shows up and he runs the fastest time ever in the conditioning test, but he can't hit, he can't throw, and he has no baseball skill whatsoever. It doesn't matter. He's not going to play. What if he shows up and he pukes a quarter mile in, but he hits absolute bombs on a baseball field? And he's your best hitter. Are you not going to play him? Or in the middle of it, you take all this information And it's not going to affect your program anyway. Everybody's running the same polls after practice anyway. If you're going to use that information for something to say, okay, we lack conditioning, we need to put more conditioning in, or we lack speed, we need to work on more speed, then it kind of makes sense. Then we have the mistake that we put those two things in the same pot. They're not. We use sprints thinking that's going to get us fast and it's going to get us conditioned. You can't do both at the same time necessarily. If you're really trying to work on speed and power, you can't get tired. This is a neurological stimulus that we need to be explosive, and we need to take good long rest periods for that to sink in and actually have an effect so we can have our quality up. Whereas if we're doing conditioning, that's a different thing. Now we can do the same modality of sprinting, but we're doing it for two very different goals. And unfortunately, we don't do enough of the high quality stuff. And so we leave a lot of speed on the table because we try to make speed and conditioning the same thing. And then we also mistake a lot of why we're not winning games or why we're struggling on conditioning when it's really not. I actually had this at one of the football teams that I work with. One of the assistant coaches said, we need to get in better shape. We need to run more. And I said, no, we don't. I said, we're not losing because of that. I said, we're losing because that kid can't cover anybody. That kid doesn't know which way to go on a play. That kid hasn't blocked anybody all night. And I said, let's watch what happens in the fourth quarter. It was a close game. 2 minutes left in the game, we call a timeout. Every single kid comes over, and I said, take a look around the huddle. Every single kid had their mouthpiece in. If we're really gassed and you just came off the field on a timeout with 2 minutes left in a stressful situation, you're not sitting there with your mouthpiece in and your helmet on. Their kids are ripping their helmets off, they're gasping for air, they're screaming for water. We weren't at all. And so conditioning wasn't our problem. And so it's more execution. So the time we probably should have spent working on execution in practice, we ended up where they wanted to run gassers. That doesn't make sense. Train for what's going to actually win games. And that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we just don't understand strength and conditioning. And that's how we have situations where I have an athlete I had last night. His team is a football team doing CrossFit as their off-season conditioning program. Now, it's easy to bash CrossFit, but that's not what I'm here to do. It's just that doesn't necessarily apply to what they need in January as an off-season football program, right? They would do this laundry list of 10 exercises for 40 reps each before they deadlifted and squatted. And then when they were done with that, they do another round of 40 reps of everything. And his strength hasn't gone up once. He was nothing but jacked up and hurt for the first month of the program, and his movement quality continually gets worse. His speed has been continuing to go down. And is this indicative of CrossFit as a brand? No, it's indicative of a coach who saw a hard workout, thought it was cool, and said, I want my kids to do a hard workout, and just slap that into a football program. It doesn't work. It just doesn't translate. If training is going to work, the expression I use is, you either believe it works or it doesn't. And if you believe it works, you got to give it some merit. And if you don't believe it works, then don't do it.
Absolutely.
So,
go ahead.
The other mistake I've seen, and I've had the benefit of being in professional weight rooms, I've had the benefit of being in high school weight rooms. They're two different things. Even when it comes to, we talk about the return to play of an injury, is that I say Adrian Peterson screwed up rehab for everybody in the rehab world for years, because what happened is he came back in less than a year and almost broke the NFL rushing record after tearing his ACL. And then what happens is, and I literally the same year had a kid who's a running back on one of the teams I work with, tried to rush back and ended up re-injuring himself because he tried to come back at 9 months. And what he doesn't understand is, one, Adrian Peterson's one of the greatest running backs in history. Okay, you're not. You're an all-county good player. You're not a freak that is going to be one of the greatest to ever play. That's number one. Number two is that's all he had to do. You still go to class. You still work at Jersey Mike's after school. You still hang out with your buddies and do whatever, right? He's not doing that. He has a full team staff as well as a bunch of independent professionals that he hires for round-the-clock treatment. You're going to the local PT and you're next to the old lady with the frozen shoulder getting ice, heat, and stim 3 times a week, right? He's getting 12-hour-a-day things. You're eating Doritos and playing Fortnite until 2 in the morning. He has probably a hyperbaric chain or a Normatec and all this other stuff. You can't come back the same time he did, right? Pro sports and high school sports are two very different things. These are kids. These are 15, 16, 17-year-old kids that their whole purpose is to do dumb shit, right? We did it as kids. And so keeping that perspective, yes, would I love to apply advanced Soviet methods and have all these things in our high school weight room? They'd be awesome. But my bigger challenge is to get them, like, get a good night's sleep, don't eat garbage, practice good form, those sorts of things, like get them to survive a workout. All the advanced stuff is great, but that takes a while to build that culture. You don't build that overnight.
Absolutely. And I've always said to a lot of my athletes that I've worked with, listen, if you guys can get really good at 10 to 12 exercises, that's it. And I can take care of the programming in a way that's going to allow you to be successful and as healthy as possible, because you don't need a million different exercises. You don't need, like you were talking about, these AMRAPs or this and that. I mean, you just need to get really, really good at the basics. And honestly, if you look at any successful athlete and in any sport, they're just really, really good at the basics. But the problem is people want to do the flashy stuff before they learn the basics. And, I remember a long time ago, I was working with a couple of young athletes, and, they're having issues with their cleans, but they had never been taught to deadlift and never been taught to front squat, but they were expected to do cleans. And it's like, well, wait a minute, like there's two fundamental movement patterns, a hinge and a squat, that you should be dialing in way before you try to add speed, velocity, etc., on top of it. And not to mention, Olympic lifts are the most technical lifts you can do in the weight room. And if you don't have a base level of strength and mobility and knowledge of that stuff, those Olympic lifts are going to be absolute dog crap. And nothing frustrates me more than seeing, a 12-year-old girl that's 76 pounds doing cleans, with absolute crap technique. There's really no need for that. They should be doing the basics, lunging, split squats, goblet squats, learning how to deadlift with a kettlebell or a barbell, etc. But the problem is everybody thinks that they're capable of these high-level exercises when they're just, honestly, they should just be focusing on the basics. And if you are just relentless with the basics and you take the time to understand how your body reacts, that's where the magic happens. And not to mention, there's an absolute educational component to it as well. I mean, I'm sure you've gotten this one several occasions where you get a high school athlete that, you've maybe trained them for a while, and then they get their college packet, and then you look at it and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like, I've seen some crazy, crazy stuff. But now you're going to have to try to teach these athletes all these new things that are somewhat arbitrary, just because maybe the strength coach in college is biased towards certain things. So I really think it's about slow cooking these athletes, man. And, if you can teach these young athletes and, middle school age, late middle school, high school, to just be relentless with the basics, then you can do the fun stuff as you get a little bit older. But if you think that spending 2 months a year in the weight room is going to give you that extra edge from a strength training standpoint, a conditioning standpoint, you're out of your mind. I mean, the best athletes that I've ever coached, they are in the gym all year round. Now, they're not doing the same workouts all year round. There's actually a bit of a periodization style thing going on, because, if you're in season, you have very, very different needs than the off-season athlete. And then if you're preseason, it's the same thing. So it's understanding, basics of periodization, when to ramp up, when to, so quote unquote peak. So there's just so many things to consider, but really what it boils down to is just a little bit of common sense and just being relentless with the basics.
Yeah, a couple quick points before we wrap it up is one, where you talked about with the Olympic lifts. Are they awesome? Yes. And if I was in a weight room where I had the time and ability to teach and oversee those, I think they can have some real value. The problem is in a situation where I put together a program and then I'm going to walk away and I'm going to trust that our offensive line coach is now going to oversee those when he's not been trained in Olympic lifting. I always tell everybody that these are so complex that if you're really good at them, you win a medal. And so to leave that in his hands is not, it's not right on my part to do that. So it really comes down to three things. We talk about it on our program design course: is access. How much access do I have to them? That's going to help make my decisions. How much info do I have about them? Meaning, how much do I know about this team and their players? Do I have testing information? Do I have background information? That kind of thing. And then last but certainly not least is safety. Is to say, I had a high school that I had a bunch of kids coming to me from where they said multiple kids on their team had lumbar stress fractures. Okay, where do you think that came from? They were doing really lousy cleans. And so the whole purpose of why we're in a weight room is to make you more robust, resilient, stronger, bigger, faster, and more athletic. If you're getting hurt in the weight room, it kind of takes away the point of that. And then with the in-season thing, we also have to understand kids are playing multiple sports, and then there's that tug of war back and forth between, I play basketball and the basketball coach wants me doing his thing, but I also play baseball and that coach wants me doing another thing. And not making the kid have to make that decision, getting a communication between the coaches. But the worst thing you do is just not have a train at all. And there's some great math if you take let's say your season's 12 weeks and you stop your training, which is insane. The whole reason training works is that your body says, oh my gosh, if you're going to keep doing that, I have to get stronger, faster, that kind of thing. And you stop doing it and your body says, well, I guess I don't need that anymore. And you're getting weaker as you're getting closer to the most important part of your season when the playoffs are coming. So not to mention, if you're looking at the long-term athletic development, let's say you have a 12-week period of your season, and you could even, because I have in-season lifts that are half hour twice a week, and we still can maintain pretty good strength and even times make gains. That twice a week, if you think about it, that's 24 workouts compounded over the course of a 4-year high school career, right? Do the math on that. That's 100 workouts that you're leaving on the table for the development of this kid from when they walk in the door as a freshman. Think about how much better that athlete would be with another 100 workouts under their belt. So when we look at a long-term athletic development, a lot of times we shove the underclassmen, in the later lift, or we put them in a corner when that's going to be the future of the team. And that's my next varsity starter in 2 years. And I'm not giving them a full ticket where they can develop because I'm not training in season. So those are just some tips. I know we got to wrap things up. We're getting up against it with time. A few things before we go. If you haven't been following us, what we're doing is we're doing a different theme each week that leads up to our live on Friday. We're going to do live on Friday, every Friday at 1 with a different topic. Last week, I talked about breathing. This week's obviously on training high school teams. Next week, we're talking about how to prioritize things in your training, meaning that someone walks in your door as a fitness client, as an athlete, or as a rehab patient, and how do I prioritize what I work on? How do I know what's important, what's not important? And there's some real gems in there that we're talking about. And then all our posts leading up to that are all related to that. So all week we've been putting out posts that I put together on training high school teams. There's another one going out later today, a couple more tomorrow. And if you email us at principlesofprogramdesign@gmail, you can get on our email list. And we also send an email with a synopsis of all our posts, as well as working on getting a bunch of our videos up on a YouTube page so you can access those later on as well. One more cool thing is I'm actually heading up to Boston to hang out with my boy Perry this weekend, because we are filming the online course for Principles of Program Design. So we're getting there, and we're hoping to have this thing out in March. So stay tuned. Really cool stuff happening. Mike, I'll let you wrap things up.
Yeah. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. If you do have any other questions, feel free to, you can email it obviously over to the Gmail account, principlesofprogramdesign@gmail. But if you want to shoot us a DM, Eric Tagati, Mike Perry, you can, shoot some questions. You follow up. We're here to help. So it's one of those things, guys. We've made the mistakes, right? We've done enough in our lives where we know what works and we know what doesn't. And listen, it's part of what we're trying to do is really educate people on how to make better decisions when it comes to programming. And listen, there are several ways to get an athlete strong. And we understand this. We're not saying that we have this 100% perfect way, but we do understand the principles of strength training. And that is really what we're getting into, is the principles. The methods can vary, right? But the principles of getting stronger and getting more conditioned stay the same. So a big part of what we're going to teach you guys within this course is how to make better decisions for your athletes, for their needs, for your equipment, etc. And that way you can start to write comprehensive programs that are going to be repeatable, sustainable, and safe. So if you guys need anything else from us, do us a favor. You can shoot us an email, shoot us a DM, and we'll go from there. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll talk to you all soon.